Hello, everyone, and you are welcome to day 2 of the Lawyers in Energy Network Training Series 2.0 in partnership with Centurion Law Group and Broomshy Consultancy. Yesterday, we had a very erudite professor of law, senior advocate of Nigeria, and former Attorney General of Edo State, in person of Professor Yinka Omorogbe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, speak to us on the negotiation process in energy transaction in Africa, where she took us through the various sources of energy, the realities of energy in Africa, and the different negotiation phases. She then concluded by educating us on the different clauses to watch out for in negotiating contracts. Our presentation can be rewatched on our YouTube channel at Lawyers in Energy Network. Moving on to our presentation for today is another distinguished international personality whose consultancy services is being sought out world over. He is the lead consultant at a diversified consulting firm, Reforms Consultancy, offering consultancy services in the areas of institutional reforms, regulatory framework, and reform in private and public entities. In addition, he is a postdoctoral research fellow and lecturer at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Prior to joining Reforms Consultancy, Dr. Terhrmen Andzenge has at various times worked at the Nigerian Apex Reform Agency, the Bureau of Public Enterprises, functioning at different times as the head infrastructure regulation desk, which is responsible for preparing the reform legislation. Before joining the Bureau of Public Enterprises, Dr. Andzenge has been the General Manager, Legal and Counsel Secretariat at the Nigerian Mining Corporation and a partner at Andzenge & Co., a private legal firm engaged in the provision of legal advice on diversified legal matters to corporate bodies and individuals, in addition to corporate litigation. Dr. Andzenge holds LLB and LLM degrees in the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, postgraduate certificate in utility regulations from the University of Florida, Grantsville, USA. In addition, he holds a doctorate degree from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, in infrastructure regulation with specialization in regulation and competition law. His field of research and specialization are regulation of utilities and reform and energy reform. He will be speaking to us today on understanding governance laws and regulation in the African energy sector. Welcome, Doctor. Over to you.
Thank you, Executive Rakiba. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir. Very clear.
Thank you. So would you allow me to share my video?
Yes, you can go ahead, sir.
Thank you. So can you see my video?
It's still yet to come up, sir.
Okay. Okay, can you see now? Can you see my video now?
Yes, we can see you, sir. Yes, sir. Beautiful.
Thank you. So
yes,
good morning, Rakiba and everyone. You're welcome on this platform. I can see the first name is Sipo Ndolovu. That's it's Zimbabwe's South African name. I'm interested in knowing whether the person is a South African or is a lawyer. Is interested in Sipo Ndolovu. That's a familiar name where I work. Sipo Ndolovu, it's nice to have you here. So, good morning. I would like to begin, and I believe we're on the same page. Rakiba, can you hear me? Akiba, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Prof. Doctor, I can hear you loud and clear, sir.
Thank you. So this morning, I would like to just take us through a short journey, understanding governing laws and regulations in the African energy sector. Now, this is a very vast area that is amazing. I'm expecting to speak about it in an hour or 30 minutes. It's so vast. We have so many countries in Africa, and each of them have different legal frameworks, different structures, different regimes in energy. And they are so diversified based on their colonial structure, colonial history. And it's quite difficult trying to speak about this in a brief setup like this. I will try to approach it in a global perspective and take a helicopter view of the issues that we want to tackle so that we can understand it. And then, of course, give some little case studies and specific examples about some African countries to buttress what we're going to be discussing. So we're speaking about understanding governing laws and regulations in the African energy sector. Now, the first thing I want to just deal with the issue of what is energy law. We're in a gathering of professionals who are in the energy sector. I want to find out, let's conceptualize this. Let's understand that we're in the correct room so that we can speak together as practitioners who understand themselves. First, we say that energy law is that field of law that's concerned with creating and enforcing laws that regulate energy use. They essentially govern everything from the use and taxation of energy, and this includes both renewable and renewable energy. Of course, there are byproducts of energy that are things like electric power, which is derivable from energy. We also, of course, will speak, it relates to it. And also, in a broad sense, energy law relates to contracts for siting energy setups, extracting energy sources, licensing the process, acquisition and ownership of rights in oil or allied products and gas from the soil, and then what happens to it after it's exploited and consumed in the downstream. So energy law is a gamut of all these aspects that relate to every aspect of harnessing and utilizing energy. Now, all the legal aspects of this gamut contain or encapsulate what we call energy law. Now, what are the sources of energy law? And remember, we're speaking about the African context. So we want to find out what are the sources of energy law. In the African context, what are the sources of energy law? What are the laws that govern energy? Where do we derive them from? And it's important to understand that we need to know that because the laws that govern energy are not just local, that's not just national, they are international in nature. And it's from international that flows the local laws. So important that we understand this. Now, essentially, there are three basic sources of energy law, energy legislation, three different sources. The first is the international treaties and the policy pronouncements from policy organizations. So you have a lot of them, you have agencies, a lot of them that pronounce it. For example, if you see the on the field, you see that the international treaties that nation states have covenanted themselves to be bound by. There are international organizations that midwife these treaties and superintend over them. These form the basis on which nation states can then come over and be able to build national laws around it. Because energy is a very ubiquitous thing. It covers across borders. It's cross-border. It is not national in outlook. So it's important that treaties cover across borders in order to ensure that they cover everything and every country. So for example, if there's pollution, if there's environmental degradation, it's not going to affect only one place. The gas flare goes into atmosphere and affects every nation, including Nigeria. So the treaties have a way of globally kind of circumscribing or setting the boundaries on which national states can begin to legislate on matters which concern energy law. Now, when you leave from the international treaties and policy organizations, you have the national legislation. Now, this is from nation states. Most nation states, if not all, are members of international treaties which have been midwifed by the World Bank and by the UN. And members of the member states are members of this organization. So whatever treaties that are entered into, they are mandated to come and domesticate it in their countries. So you have sources of national legislation, which most of the time is drawn from the international treaties. Very important so that we can understand that that is one major source of the treaties that we deal with. Now, when you deal with the national legislation, they are primary sources of energy law in national legislation. These are case law, these are statutes, these are rules, these are regulations. In the military era, you used to call them edicts or decrees. But essentially, these are derivable from national legislation, but they form, if there are no laws, they form the basic foundation on which national legislation form, and they are the things that we consider to form the source of energy law. Now, talking about international treaties and international policy organizations, you will see here we have a gamut of so many of them, international treaties and organizations, which set standards for the exploitation and of activities in the energy sector. So you have, for example, the Vienna Convention for Protection of Ozone Layer. You have the Kyoto Protocol on the framework for climate change, a host of so many of them. These are promoted by the UN. And most of these nations, African nations, if all, are part of the UN. So when these treaties are drafted, nation states debate it, pass it, then they bind them and they come and domesticate it into national legislations, essentially. So these are the sources on which most nations of the Africa or all nations of Africa derive their energy legislation from international treaties and organizational policymakers. Now, of course, apart from the treaties, you have some of the organizations that impact and assist African countries to pass legislation. You have the IEA, Atomic Energy, which people know. And then, of course, one which we don't know too much, but which is quite active in the space, trying to assert itself, is the African Union Commission. They are a body that is set up to try to regulate issues of energy. They are not doing much, but they ought to be in the space. But some of their treaties are what the African countries have demonstrated. They deal with essentially energy matters. So remember, as we speak, that we are saying that energy legislation for African countries is drawn from two international sources, from international treaties and then from international policy organizations, which will have some of them here. And it's from there that they are domesticated into the national laws of the country. Now, we are coming down to what you call the downstream now, the national laws, the nation state laws, the laws governing energy in, say, Liberia, say, South Africa, in, say, Kenya, in, say, Nigeria. These are essentially the energy laws that are derived from the national international policy organizations and also from the treaties that has been assented to by nation states. So national energy laws have this trajectory. National assemblies set goals, and the national law and policy do essentially three things. National energy and policy does three things. It sets energy goals, short-term, middle-term, long-term. But policies are not law. They are merely policy stipulations of where we are going. They are not laws. They also offer incentives for people to come in and exploit the energy sources. They give tax breaks, grants, and land transfers, essentially. But after all this is done, you still have to enact a law that speaks to all these goals that you have set up. Now, before I go into the details, I would like to just speak about the role of law in energy, because this is quite critical, because sometimes people would ask you, what are lawyers doing in energy? Energy is essentially an engineering thing. Engineers wear their boots, they go to the ground, they get dirty, they excavate oil or gas, they set power stations. What has lawyers got to do with it? You would like to find out the relevance of lawyers in energy. And this will help you conceptualize your work in the sector. So essentially, a lawyer in the energy sector encourage, incentivize, and initiate platforms for new energy infrastructure. What does that mean? It means that we use legal tools to encourage, to incentivize, and to initiate platforms for new energy infrastructure. That means we craft legislations, regulations, orders, rules that encourage people to enter into the energy space. Because imagine if you are going to enter into the space and there are no legal relationships that are binding. Nobody will enter, because most of the investments in the oil and gas sector and the energy sector are sunk in nature. Sunk means they are long tenured. You don't come in with a briefcase, you invest and you get your money out. It takes a while. So you need to have platforms that guarantee and give you comfort that if you invest, you will recover your investments with a return on it. Two, the law balances economics, finance, engineering, environment, and politics to deliver desired energy outcomes. What does that mean? Typically in an energy transaction, there's a mix of so many professionals who are coming together as a cocktail to deliver an outcome of energy availability. This cocktail of professionals include people who are economists, you have people who are in finance, you have people who are engineers, you have environmental experts, you have politicians who are just there to make laws. Now, each of these several professionals and people from different fields representing different interests are glued together by law. For them to discuss in an intelligible manner and have agreements that will be able to stand the test of time. Otherwise, the economists, the financial people would have money, but they will be scared, because one thing you should know is that investment is shy of uncertainty, is shy of a lack of clearly defined legal frameworks. So the economics, the financial people have money, but they're not going to get into it, and they know what it's in it for them. The engineers, of course, we need a platform that when we go into drill, we can start and we can finish. When we find oil, we can bring it out. When I set a power plant, we should go to see it to the end and produce power. Politicians want to ensure that the economists, the finance people, the engineers work together to ensure that there's energy availability, to ensure peace and tranquility in the people they are leading as politicians. So all these people have diverse and sometimes mutually exclusive interests. The lawyer brings them on the table and develops a conversation that allows them to agree together to work as partners, each contributing their strengths to achieve the purpose of which the goal is being attained. Of course, we also have the fact that lawyers evolve tools to facilitate the above a transaction. So for example, when you want to do this, a power a power station, you have to develop tools to see how you can craft this thing to work. So for example, Sahara Energy wanted to buy Igbein Power. Igbein Power is the biggest power station in Africa. They went and got Koreans to come and partner with them. They got KPMG to come and advise them on how to acquire this asset. They got UBA and a consortium of banks to give them money. Then they got the federal government to say the plan to them. You see here, you have economists, you have finance people, you have engineers, you have politicians. But in this mix, the only glue that will keep them together in an intelligible matter is a lawyer who will come in, an energy expert, and we couple all this interest into a relationship that can stand the test of time. So they develop those tools. So essentially, we'll say energy law is concerned with creating, enforcing, operationalizing laws that regulate energy. And if you have to create energy, you have to harvest it, you have to sell, you have to use, you have to tax, you have to conserve. All these things are part of the gamut of energy, and it has to be properly documented and put in a place where it can be enforced. Remember, as we go on, that investments in energy are sunk, they are long tenured, and they are huge amounts of money. They cannot be, typically in African countries, no nation can have the capacity financial to fund all their energy needs nationally. They always look for international funding. International funding doesn't come into a place where the legal framework is hazy, is unreliable, or is shifty, or cannot be ascertained. So lawyers ensure that every bolt and knot of the legal aspects of a transaction are firm in place, ascertainable, certain, credible, in such a way that investors can come in and invest without challenges. That is a part of the role of law in the energy. So we go on to this is we'll just finish this now. We go on to the ubiquity of law in energy. Now, why ubiquity means that it's common, it's everywhere, it's a given. Now, energy impacts on our daily lives in everything we do. From the time you wake up in the morning up to the time you go to bed, you encounter energy at every intersection that you go. From your bathroom, to the soap you use, to the water that runs into your place, the power that you use, everything, the food you cook, to the microwave, energy is interwoven in everything that you are doing. The fuel in your cars, that you fuel your generator on the cars, the power that is generated from energy needs to have iron-cast legal frameworks to ensure that people who invest, and remember that most of the investments in oil and gas, much of it is done by the private sector, at least in developing countries in the past decade. So as I will be speaking to you later on, when the private sector comes to invest, they have one interest in mind, and the interest is, recover my investment, have a profit on it. However, when this happens, the state wants power to be available. The consumer wants reliable power at very low prices. So all the interests are different. And you need a legal framework that addresses each of these things in a careful manner. So energy is everywhere, and law underlies it. Energy, cooking gas, creams, lubricants, everything is related to energy, but they cannot be available if law is not involved in it, because law sort of defines the relationships that bring up this energy that brings these things to life. Now, colleagues, I want to speak to this to help us understand what I'm speaking about. National laws, energy regulations follow a pathway that is charted and is globally recognized. And I believe you can see this chart. It's a flowing chart. It speaks to the gamut or to the trajectory and to the route that a sensible, a realistic, and a normal national or international energy law or regulation will take. This is the pathway. So in making laws, in making regulations, you must have this pathway. There's a policy, there's a law, there's implementation. Now, the first thing before you make a law, the first thing before you have a regulation, first thing before you have a legal framework for energy, every nation must have national policy and development goals. What does that mean? Every nation decides as a nation, where are we going? What do we want to achieve? That stipulation is very important. And this is by way of overarching broad policy pronouncements, which are written down, which are providing a guide for people. So for example, you have a country that says, let me have Operation Feed the Nation. That's a policy goal. It's national policy. Then you can then begin to operationalize downwards to the downstream by bringing the boats and not to bring it to pass. So every nation, before they can have a cohesive and effective energy legal framework, they must have national policy or development goals of where they are going concerning energy. What is the plan of your country for energy? Where are you going? Energy sufficiency in 5 years, in 10 years? How many people have energy? How many people don't have energy? What are the constraints? How do we tackle it? What will be the legal framework? What law will best fit this framework we have where to go? What vehicle of law will take us to this policy, national policy we want to do? 2, you want to ask yourself, what is the institutional framework that will achieve this policy? What are the institutions that will actualize this policy? Would it be a ministry? Would it be a committee? Would it be an ad hoc body? Would it be an independent agency? You need to determine the institutional framework that will actualize and bring it to life the policy you have. When you determine what is the regulatory framework? Who will regulate these institutions? First, you have a policy where you are going, then you have a law. Then when you have a law, who will regulate the institutions? Because laws are not self-executing. Note that laws are not self-actualizing. Laws are not self-executing. Laws are merely laws. They have to be executed. Laws are executed by institutions. Institutions have to be regulated to ensure that there is no abuse of the law and they are following the law. So you have a policy which is national, which is broad, then you determine the institutions that will govern it, then you determine the regulators that will regulate the institutions. So from that chart, you can see we have a national policy, the government policy goals, and then you have a sectoral policy. Every nation has the broad policy directives. When you finish that, the sectors, the particular sector, say in this case, energy, we sit down and decide, drawing from the national state policy, how do we have an energy policy that speaks to that national policy, but is specific to our own sector? So for example, you have national goals of Nigeria says, we have oil. Let's harness it for the betterment of the country. A policy will tell you, how do we do this? Through what mechanism? Through what route? Through what frameworks? Through what institutional framework? Through what regulatory body are we able to harness this oil? So the sectoral policy is a bit more narrow. It's narrow to a sector. So for example, you have energy sector, you have a transport policy, energy sector, you have a competition policy document. Each sector ordinarily will have a policy that interfaces with the national policy of a nation. Now, from that policy, please be following me carefully on the chain. From that policy will be derived the laws. So you have a national policy, which is overarching. Then you have a sectoral policy, which is drawn from the national policy. The laws are a direct product of the sectoral policies, which are direct product of the national policy. And then from there, the next stage is the implementation of national policy through the sectoral policy, through the laws that have been enacted by the National Assembly. The implementation involves institutions because laws don't execute themselves, as I said before. So implementation involves institutions which bring these things into life. When you follow this sequence, when you follow this route, there's clarity, there's predictability, there's coherence, there's complementary. There's clarity because all the things you're going to do will need private sector investment. Remember that when Nigeria, for example, as a nation, most of the African countries were colonized. When the colonial masters were leaving, the new governments decided they were going to do everything to ensure that they have political independence and economic independence. So the government went into every field to invest in every field and every sector. But after 10 years, nation states in Africa realized they can't do this. They don't have the money. They don't have a wherewithal. And then they decided to invite the private sector. And the private sector, when they come to invest, as I said before, they have only one goal: profit, recovery, profit, recovery. They don't have any other goal in mind. So for any law to meet the standards where investment can come in, it has to have clarity. You have to read it and know it and say, if I do this, this is this. If I enter here, these are the conditions. If I fulfill conditions, I will get this. If I get this, I'll make a return. We get a return, I will get a profit. So there has to be clarity. Two, these laws, because they are clear, they are predictable. Now remember, investment is shy of unpredictability. Where the environment is hazy, investments are not much, because investors want a clear-cut, predictable environment so that you don't invest and you lose everything the next day. So for example, if you have a place where, I was talking to a friend of mine last week, he's into trucking business, and he was telling me that for the past 10 years, for his trucks to carry products from Lagos to the northern part of the country, past Plateau and Bauchi, he has negotiated with Boko Haram, and he pays a premium every month to ensure that his trucks are not hijacked. So you see that kind of atmosphere is very hazy. It takes only a very ambitious and risky investor to invest in that background. It has to be a personal investor. No bank will give you that money if they know the environment is very hazy. So it has to be, the legal framework has to be clear, has clarity, has to be predictable, has to be coherent, easily understood, easily appreciated, easily grasped. They have to complement each other. They have to complement, no frictions. They have to complement each other. So moving ahead, we'll go to the next one, which is so if you remember, if you have a wind back, I said we start with the national policies. Now, using Nigeria as a case study, Nigeria had national development plans, which you can see on the screen. There was national first, a second, a third, a fourth. By 85, we stopped. The thing became distorted. So we not had coherent policy plans since 1985. We had what you call rolling plans. We had the NIS draft document. You had the Vision 2020. But then there has been distortions. But typically speaking, a developmental trajectory, these policy plans, these individual plans are the ones from which you can draw your policies from. So, speaking with that, let us speak very briefly on the issue of legal frameworks. Let's see essentially here features of a legal and regulatory framework. Talking to practitioners, you would like to know that policies are actually just overarching. They are broad. They may be part of short term, middle term, or long term, but they are very large. They are loose. They are in the air. They provide a helicopter view of the industry. They give directional thrusts. They stipulate the institutional framework, the regulatory framework, and they also tell you what are the enabling tools and regulations you can use to achieve the purposes you want to achieve, essentially. So to contextualize this now, Nigeria as a case study again, these are the policies that we have, which were supposed and should have been drawn from the national policy stipulations and national development goals. You had the electric power policy, you had the renewable energy policies, you had the oil and gas policy. Now, essentially, these are the policies that are sector-based and are supposed to guide the sector in the kind of law that we make. So we come to laws now. Remember, if you go back to this, you see that you have sectoral policy, you have laws. So we want to come to laws now and see what laws are supposed to contain. Now, in every sector, in the energy sector particularly, for you to have an environment that makes sense, you have to have an enabling legislation that speaks to the unique and peculiar needs of the sector in the energy subsector that you want to deal with. Now, the enabling legislation would give a law that will have the area of coverage of that legislation, what you call a jurisdictional authority. The law will have to be clear and determine and divide and delineate the policy from the regulation and to the commercial. It has to have powers and duties, regulatory principles, practices, and policies. It has to have legal powers to carry out the intent of the law. And most importantly, every energy law must have stipulations protecting property and contract rights. This is very critical because the area we are in now is the area of private sector investment. Nobody invests, apart from the fact that he wants to invest, recover his costs and the profit. He wants to also ensure that he doesn't lose his money. Nobody should seize his money. Nobody should appropriate his money. Nobody should take away his money in the names of sovereignty of a nation. And of course, every businessman wants to see that. What are the contract rights regime? If there's a dispute, can I enforce my contracts? Can I enforce my rights? If there's a dispute, how is the legal framework? Is the court system functional? Is the arbitration process okay? So all these things typically are in the enabling law that is derived from the policy that is derived from national goal. Also, the law has to be predictable and flexible. Predictable because you invest when something is predictable and know what is going to happen tomorrow. Flexible because it gives you room that you can negotiate if there are challenges. So the law gives you power to be flexible, also predictable, so you can negotiate in case there are challenges with it. Now, just to give you an idea, of course, you should know this as practitioners. In electric power, you have two basic laws. In electric power, these are the two. Electric Power Sector Reform Act and the NEMSA law. And then the oil and gas, you have the Constitution of Federal Republic of Nigeria. Why do you say Constitution? Energy is a very contentious thing. The oil and gas is a very contentious and very fundamental thing to the existence of any nation. So you know that for every nation, it stipulates that everything they have belongs to the nation. So were you to find out where energy starts and energy regulation starts, you have to go to the Constitution, not even to the law. So if you want to know where the source of energy strength of Nigeria is in the Constitution and not in the Petroleum Industry Bill. I know you have a Petroleum Industry Bill of 2021. You also have an energy law, which was passed in 1989, which is supposed to deal with all energy matters. It's going to be superintended over by the Energy Commission of Nigeria. Now, again, let me contextualize this. Here you see that you have sectors, you have laws. Then you have to have institutions that will implement the laws. If you have laws, institutions have to implement the laws. So, in every energy sector and energy landscape, the law has to be crafted to determine who will implement the law, who will give life to that energy law. So energy law speaks to the policy determination, and whether the law will be effective and will be implemented effectively will depend on the situation of the energy, of the law, and the agency in the power architecture of a nation. So, for example, if you put an energy agency in a ministry that is not very strong, they may likely be swallowed and they will not be very effective. So you want to put an institution in a place the law will provide. Does he report to a minister? Does he report to the president? Where does he report? Where is this situated in the architecture of the government? The law also gives the agency functions and powers. It seeks to give it independence. Now, for lawyers, you know that independence is subdivided to de facto and de jure. It's one thing to give the powers, it's another to which to be effective. So the law must specifically state that so. The new laws that we have in place in the Nigerian context have been doing that. For example, the Electric Power Sector Reform Act has a provision which requires that there should not be interference in its day-to-day running by the minister. That way you are ensuring that apart from being dependent on a standalone agency, it can also state it to be so. But beyond that, the effectiveness of the management will determine whether they are indeed, they are de facto or they are de jure. The law has to also provide for the funding streams of that agency to make it effective. And it has to provide for the appointment and discipline of the management of that company. Let's go on. The law also has to state essentially energy. When there's energy challenges occur, once you get energy, matters of completions are coming in. Before now, you had a monopoly in NNPC in the Nigerian context, where there was NNPC was doing everything. NNPC was a commercial person, he was a policy person, he was a regulator. But the PRA seeks to demarcate these things. Also gives room for competition among the players in the sector so that if you come and invest in the sector, you can compete in a meaningful way. So there are two ways to do this. You can either have a standalone law, which Nigeria has, it has a competition commission, or you can embed the provisions of competition into the enabling law. Just as you on the same page with me, competition law is called in different names in different jurisdictions. In US, it's called antitrust. In China, it's anti-monopoly. In UK, Australia, it's called trade practices. And then in Europe, mostly it's referred to antitrust and competition law. But here we call it competition and consumer protection law in a general context. So essentially it regulates that companies don't abuse their position in providing services essentially. And they ensure that things don't happen like that. Now, let me speak very briefly on the effective, why are we not having effective legal regimes in Africa? What are the problems? We have some of them that are quite critical. You have, most of the time is the instability, which you all are aware. Governments keep changing, and even when they don't change, there's no policy continuity in most regimes in Africa. And of course, there's rampant corruption. And this disincentivizes people who want to come and invest. Because when there's no political stability and continuity, it creates uncertainty. And that increases higher transactional costs, especially if we go to invest in technologies which are needed in the energy sector, because energy sector is an evolving sector. We are talking about transition. All investments in the renewable energies are new technologies. They need to have financing. Financing will not come in if there's instability, if there's no continuity, or if there's corruption and a huge measure of discretion in policymakers. Also, there is not ease of doing business. There's still a huge problem in doing business in this country, in most African countries. Before you can enter inside, there are a lot of roadblocks, a lot of checkpoints, which are essentially tolls that individuals collect money. They are not actually streamlined. So you see that typically people come in, but they get frustrated, so they can't enter and penetrate the market. So there's no ease of market entry for new firms. And of course, naturally, the people who are there already, some of the state monopolies that became private monopolies are controlling the market. Incumbents, even incumbents, they were both incumbents and government sold it, and they are controlling the markets. Those things push people who are small players out. But as you know, as lawyers, you will know that the engine room of economic growth of any nation is the medium players. It's not the higher players, not the strong, it's the medium players, the small, medium scale people. They are the engine room. And where the bigger players push them out, they're not going to have much of a traction in a business in development. Of course, you have most of the regulations that we have in the African context. They have a huge dose of discretionary powers. And discretion is another language for corruption that you will find that strange as a lawyer to comprehend. But once you put discretion in the law, discretion depends on the mindset, the values of the person who is exercising the discretion. So where regulations and laws put discretion in the hands of policymakers and technocrats, it gives room for them to discard discretion one way or the other to favor their own people or to get benefits. So as much as possible, it is important that laws and regulations don't reduce discretions to a very minimal level, because it certifies technology transfer. Also, there's challenge of weak protection of intellectual property rights and also on certain property rights. The licensing regimes are very unwieldy. They are very long. You've had cases in places like Morocco, where you start a licensing regime, and midway, it is canceled and start again. That's happened because discretion is involved. So it's important that we allow licensing regimes to be clearly spelled out, cast in stone, and followed to the letter. Now, let me speak to this barrier so that you can understand it better. Now, look at this Nigerian case study. This is the energy sector, energy regime in Nigeria. This speaks to overlapping roles. Now, these are the ministries, some of the ministries that look after energy matters in Nigeria. The Ministry of Power, Ministry of Solid Minerals, Ministry of Environment, Petroleum, and Finance. Now, each of these superintend over different parts of the energy sector. However, there are overlaps. And typically in developing countries of Africa, when there are overlaps, there are tough fights. People want to protect their turf. So there are conflicts and information is not shared, so development is stunted. So for example, the Yaradua government, I believe so, started getting the right by saying, well, look, let's have a Ministry of Energy. And Buhari also came and did it. Let's have a Ministry of Energy that we will house all the energy components of a nation into one basket. Unfortunately, that was reversed because as good as it was realized that the basket was too big for one person to carry. As to whether it was too big or not is a matter of discussion, because even if it's big, you have Department of Energy in the US, but if you have proper division of labor and proper structures in place, the minister will not need to do everything. You'll just be a person on top, but you have effective technocrats that cover different aspects of energy and to work well. But here, we have all these overlaps. Ministry of Power is having so many things. And you will see that, for example, MBET. MBET is the body that was created essentially to buy power and sell it. They are going to make the power to be bankable, so people can, generation companies can generate power and be able to have people to buy it. So there was stopgap measure to ensure that even if power is produced at a lower cost, they will cushion the subsidy regime and bring power. MBET was under the supervision of Ministry of Power. Over time, it moved to Ministry of Finance. So you have different power units pulling apart, and that cannot allow for coherence. And you see that in different countries like Kenya. Kenya have recently begun to change that to ensure that they have one house, one-stop shop that deals with all energy matters. But Nigeria is symptomatic of other African countries where you have different energies in different platforms, different power centers, dealing with coal, dealing with energy, dealing with power, dealing with oil and gas, and pulling apart because of tough fights. This serves as barriers most of the time. So you see the ministries that are in charge of dealing with matters related to energy. There are so many of them, and each of them have their interests and hardly meet eye to eye most of the time. Now, having talked about that, let's go into another very interesting aspect, the energy atlas of Africa. Some of these figures you may be familiar with, just to enrich your knowledge. We produce globally 9% of the global needs, but we consume only 4.2%. That means we produce more, but we consume little. We hold 7.5% of the total world proved gas reserves. However, we produce 6% and we consume only less than 4% of the gas that we produce. Our share of the energy sources mostly is from oil, and Africa provides 42% of the energy needs, energy sources. And of course, most of gas will provide 28%, coal is 22%, hydro is 6%, renewable and nuclear is just 1% because renewable is just coming up. It's a new area is a new area that is just developing. It's not caught up too much in Africa because the costs are very much, technologies are new. Nuclear, of course, is also a very new area. As you see later on, most of the countries, just South Africa has a nuclear station. No other, Egypt is building one at advanced stage, but no other African country has a nuclear capability in terms of a plant that can give it power. And of course, with some other statistics, you see, we have a lot of sources of renewable energy. So many, they are everywhere. Of course, South Africa is the 7th largest world producer of coal. And they have a share of 94% of the share of coal in Africa. There's abundant hydro, wind, and geothermal energy sources. But of course, biomass, the one that is unhealthy, that is destructive, that depletes the environment, so at 30%. And of course, you have a figure which says that close to 800 million Africans have no access to energy, which is the highest in any continent in the world. Now, what are the challenges? We have the challenges there. Poor exploitation and usage, multi-energy crisis, power inaccessible, affordable, unreliable. And then the outcomes, of course, is a lot of poverty in the nation of Africa. Now, how are the energy sources governed? Because talk about the energy, the legal framework for energy, the laws, the regulations, how are they governed? I'll just briefly speak to the different, how they are governed specifically in different countries and then in each of them so that we can follow it. Now, coal. Half of the African states contain coal-bearing rock, half. Right from Africa, right to the belt of Africa, right to Botswana, up to Nigeria, right to the Niger, up there, there's a belt that has rocks that bear coal. But the largest deposits are in South Africa. And now, of course, they consume 70%. Africa, as Africans, the coal we produce, we consume about 70% locally, which is South Africa, and then we export the rest of it. And for each of the sectors of the country, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Morocco, and Egypt, they have uniform laws. Just like oil and gas, you come in, you first prospect. When you find you have a prospecting license, if you find something of commercial yield, you are granted a license based on the subsisting mining law, which is different jurisdictions. But first you have a prospecting license, then you have a mining license, and then based on that, sometimes there are royalties, sometimes there are joint venture agreements depending on the country. But always it comes to a tier stage of prospecting license and then exploiting license, which is a mining license, essentially for coal. Nigeria as a nation has not quite gained traction in coal. Of course, we are being told coal is a very cheap, it's a very dirty means of power. We've heard that a lot, they have told us a lot, but recently, because of the Ukrainian-Russian war, suddenly this argument is now being lost by even those who have been pushing us to stop using coal. Europe is going back to coal now because they are losing, they can't get their energy needs from Russia. So Europe is going back to coal. But we have so much coal which is lying fallow and which they were being told not to use because it's a dirty source of energy. Now you see that that's a South African case, Republic of South Africa. They have a law, the Mining and Petroleum Resources Development Act, and the other act, which deals with licenses that are given on first come, first serve basis. And they have another law that deals with environmental pollution issues. And they have a national plan that deals with climate change impacts and commitments that are global in nature, but which are correlated in that country. Now, in oil and gas, legal framework, again, we see where it's found. Most of the oil is found in most of these countries: Libya, Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Sudan. And 91% plus of the oil we have, and natural gas, is found in Algeria, Nigeria, Egypt, Libya, and Nigeria. Now, each of these countries have varying legal regimes. But what is common to all these countries is that they have, most of them, production sharing agreements or joint venture agreements with the state entity, or a combination of the two, depending on what is benefited. So a licensing regime essentially licenses somebody who enters into a joint venture with a state entity. But recently they have now begun to see how they can allow private entities who are indigenous to come in too. Some statistics there. Nigeria, Algeria is the largest producer of gas in Africa. The levels of Angola, Cote d'Ivoire, and other ones are lower. Now, natural gas and petroleum products. Algeria is a case study. They have a Hydrocarbon Act, which has been very effective. And what that law essentially says is that every mineral, every gas, every oil and gas, everything they have is owned by the state and is going to be managed by the state entity called Sonatrach. Now, Sonatrach, like the Nigerian NNPC, then enters into production share agreements with multinational companies and gives them sometimes concession agreements to be able to mine this. But in every relationship, Sonatrach owns 51% across the board. That means they control everything. And they control 80% of petroleum production. That was a very strong law. So they brought a new law called the Hydrocarbon Act, which allows people to be able to bring FDI inside the country in Algeria, but still be able to, they can negotiate their way out and get their income and live quickly. So they have learned, they started very hard, but they mellowed down and they watered down their legal framework and allowed more people to come in so that they can harness what they had. The Nigerian concept, just Nigerian concept, you know, the main objective of PIA to promote exploration and exploitation of precious resources for the benefit of Nigerians. And it says they want to encourage sustainable development of the industry, ensure safe, efficient transportation, distribution, infrastructure, and to strengthen transparency and accountability. And they have those three lessons which you are very familiar with, I'm sure. PEL, EPL, the PML. So essentially, these are tools that only lawyers can craft because they are very technical in their nature. Only lawyers can craft and superintend over it. Engineers that can do, but they cannot interpret and enforce it because most of them are legal concepts that have legal implications and legal connotations. So lawyers are very central to this. Now, nuclear energy. It may interest us to know that Namibia has a huge concentration of uranium, which is used for nuclear energy, but they are not mining. They're going to multinational companies who are mining it. As I mentioned before, the only power station in Africa where nuclear is in South Africa, and it provides about 6 to 7% of their electric power needs. For South Africa, you have a Nuclear Energy Act, which governs the contribution and the interface of nuclear energy to the energy sector. And the Nuclear Energy Corporation Limited controls the energy production from the nuclear setup. As I mentioned before, Egypt is building something along the way. Some countries are also trying to discuss nuclear energy options. Now, as I begin to wind down, let me speak about renewable energy. Again, we have so much, but as I said before, most of it is not being harnessed. Most have been harnessed. Now, Kenya has taken a lead in having a standalone law to deal with an aspect of renewable energy, which is very commendable. Morocco attempted it, but they didn't see it through, and they have a regulation and an agency that deals essentially with renewable energy. But Kenya has a law, standalone law, and they're making a lot of progress in ensuring that geothermal resources are tapped for the betterment of the nation. Now, the legal and regulatory framework for renewable energy differs from so many countries, but what is unique and what is uniform to all of them is that they are using IPPs to utilize renewable energy sources. So IPPs are coming in and they're building solar farms and trying to generate power and sell it to the grids or to the mini grids. Ghana too has policies, regulations, but they don't have a standalone law. But in all this, in Kenya as in other countries, even though they don't have laws, what they have is standardized PPAs, power purchase agreements, which allow people who produce power through renewable energy, they get buy the power from them and then feed it to a national or local grid for use and pay them, essentially. Now, the energy generation, which is what we know, the electricity generation. Since the 1980s, in almost all of Africa, up to 1980, electricity generation was purely a state function. The state was in charge of generating, transporting, distributing, and selling power. And they had huge monopolies, which were centralized, which were vertically integrated, which were monopolies to generate power, transmit power, distribute and supply networks. This has been found not to be sustainable. The state too hasn't got money to do this. So since the 1980s, there have been a gradual move away from this. And they've been breaking down these monopolies and selling them in bits, in generations, outfits, distribution outfits. And that way, it has allowed power to begin to improve because the state cannot do most of these things. Now, in electricity, this is a standard form of reforms which the legal frameworks recognize in all of Africa. Now, I say all of Africa because all the reforms in electric power were championed by the World Bank. Almost 95% of them was championed by the World Bank. So the World Bank prescribed a standard model for reforms in the electricity sector. And every law followed this model, which the World Bank had stipulated. And it has these different steps. You have to popularize first, register the entity to have a life on its own, to stand alone, to be a legal entity. Then begin to commercialize it, make it autonomous, make it commercial so they can begin to operate like a commercial entity. Then you pass a law that will allow you to start holistic reforms. Reforms of breaking it up, the incumbent monopoly, breaking up along generation, transmission, distribution arms, and selling it off. It's intrinsic to this legislation is the independent regulatory agency mode. The World Bank required that once you are going to do this, you need an independent regulator for the power sector. So if you see in most of Africa, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Kenya, all of them have independent regulatory agencies which implement the reforms, regulate the reforms in the electricity sector. And then you restructure the sector, and that brings in the private sector, and you have independent power producers, and then you sell the assets along the lines of generation and distribution. Their hesitancy is in selling the transmission arms but essentially you sell them. Once you sell, it is hoped that competition will ensue. Once you sell them, competition will ensue. So these reforms, as you can see, they have been, so far you can see the reforms in the electricity sector. All these countries have reformed since 1980s. And about 7 are about to enter inside. They are studying and watching. Of course, the sectoral spread of the reforms in the oil and gas and electricity is the reforms in the energy sector covers electricity, oil and gas, and involves solar, wind, biomass, geothermal, and hydro. So it's spread across 3 different sectors. Now I want to stop here and end this by saying this. There's a huge argument that is ongoing now, and for legal practitioners and practitioners in the field, you would like to know what this argument is. This argument is called energy transition, and it overshadows everything in energy now. We are being told we need to move from biofuels to energy transition, transit from oil and gas to cleaner energy. Now, the challenging thing is that there are tensions in this argument. There are tensions in this conversation. What are the tensions? Essentially, most of the developed countries, most not all of them, develop their economies by using these cheap fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal. But suddenly, as using this, they have depleted the ozone layer and has pushed the planet to become very, very polluted. Suddenly now, they are coming to tell us, please transit, leave these hard fuels, go to transition. The challenge is, this is a challenge. How do you transit and ensure there's economic growth? How do you transit and ensure that there's just transition of energy? So there's a new argument being developed about just transition. Allow energy access first before you transit. Because people need energy before they can transit. They have energy that can transit. We don't have energy. You first need to have energy before you can transit to cleaner energy. So it's important. The challenge for the developing world of Africa is to meet the energy needs of their millions of citizens who lack basic energy, while at the same time getting involved in the conversation of energy transition. So it is not a done conversation, it's still ongoing, but the challenge is to ensure that the conversation takes cognizance of the energy needs of Africa and seeks to allow energy to be available before you can transit. Because the people who are shouting energy transition use the same sources and polluted the environment, which we are suffering more. But without it, you cannot have peace and tranquility to transit. You need to have energy before you can be able to have the kind of transition that I'm talking about. I think I would like to stop here and thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for that wonderful presentation. It was really educating. As a recap of his presentation, Doctor started by giving us the various meaning of energy law. He said energy law is a field of law concerned with creating and enforcing laws that regulate energy use. He then went ahead to give the various sources of energy law, some of which he mentioned were international treaties, energy law and policy organization, national legislation, case law, statutes, to mention a few. He broke down each of the sources of law for us and then went further to educate us on the role of law in the energy space, where he said the role of law is to encourage, incentivize, and or initiate platforms for new energy infrastructure. Balance economics, finance, engineering, environment, and politics to deliver desirable energy outcomes to society. He also mentioned that the role of energy law is an evolving tool used to facilitate interaction in the energy space and is concerned with creating, enforcing, and operationalizing laws that regulate energy use. Dr. Andzenge then gave us case studies from different countries such as Nigeria, Algeria, Kenya, and South Africa, to mention a few. He also gave us several barriers for an effective legal regimes for energy in Africa, and mentioned that lack of political stability or continuity of regimes, corruption, monopolistic or oligopolistic behavior by incumbents may deter market entry, among several others. He also showed us the African Energy Atlas, where we saw that Africa produces 42% of the world's oil, 28% of gas, 22% of coal, 6% of hydro, and 1% of renewable and nuclear. He also mentioned how the energy industry are governed in each country. Finally, he made us understand that the challenges faced in our energy laws are its poor exploitation and usage, mounting energy crisis, power, and its unreliability, to mention a few. Kindly note that you can type your questions in the message box and I'll read them out for the doctor to answer. Before I start taking questions from the audience, doctor, I would like to know if there is any current policy or law regulating or guiding the energy industry in Africa.
There are policy stipulations by the Energy Commission arm of the African Union about the way to go. But as we speak now, there's only, to my knowledge, only one African country that has a renewable energy law, which I spoke to, which is Kenya. Other ones have policies. But remember, laws are essentially the treaties. Most of them have not been domesticated by Nigeria. They have been accepted but not been domesticated as laws. Because it is difficult to domesticate these laws because they will clash with national interests. So, for example, Nigeria says, Kyoto Convention says, don't use coal. Nigeria can't do that because coal is a central part that we can harness for our power. So if we shut that one, we're shutting a very entire segment of our economy. So nations of Africa, from what I have read, from what I perceive, from what I see, they are going slow and steady on renewable energy. Only Kenya, and guys, that also is geothermal. The other aspects are being careful. And think about Nigeria. Nigeria, with all the talk about renewable energy, there's still not a coherent draft law which is on renewable energy. There are a lot of about 4 or 5 policies, renewable energy, and also there are some incentives by the central bank and the Federal Inland Revenue Service is giving incentives. But even that is argumentative because I remember there was an incentive given by either World Bank or Federal Inland Revenue, by Federal Ministry of Finance, and Federal Revenue came and countered that incentive. So there is no overarching law, legal framework for renewable in Africa. It is still developing.
Okay. Do you think the current energy law does it put into consideration the ongoing energy transition?
I'll be back here. Let me just quickly take my daughter to that place.
Prof, can you hear me?
Yes, what did you ask? Somebody was taking a daughter somewhere.
I said, does the current law reflect the current energy realities in Africa, putting into consideration the ongoing energy transition?
This one is in oil and gas. It's a 4-day or 5-day event. It's very interesting.
Could you ask the person to mute the laptop, the microphone? Now, no, they don't. And this is a challenge, and it's a very interesting challenge. Transition is a beautiful argument, but transition is not right now the way to go for Africa. And African countries realize this. That is why they are slow in enacting transition laws, because they will impact negatively on them. Because remember, over 7 million Africans don't have access to energy. But if we enact these transition laws, energy transition laws, these people are going to be shut out completely, because you can, for example, use firewood. You can use diesel to power your generator, or to run you run a generator, or to run a factory. But imagine if I start from using that oil. Well, a solar panel, one solar panel costs so much. I was talking to a friend of mine in Abuja the other day, and he told me he used close to 2 million to just put about 6 beautiful solar panels on his house. So it's not economical. The cost of infrastructure in solar is very high. So the transition cannot be a meaningful, realizable conversation until we attain some minimum level of energy sufficiency before we can go to that and empower economies. So the laws are not there. Not to talk about being adequate. They are not there. Nigeria doesn't have it. No country, to my research knowledge, has it, except maybe Kenya, are dealing essentially with renewable energy. There are snippets here and there, but they just speak to some of the aspects. There's no overarching specific laws dealing with transition, which is why we don't have a problem, because governments are careful not to go to that area just yet. I see there.
Okay.
Questions that came. Yeah, go on, please.
I even get work for shopping. I get work for shop. Me, I don't come out to tell you money. Make us
I saw 2 questions coming. I don't know. Would you like to?
Yes, sir. Yes, Lawrence from Lagos wants to know how the medium players tribes and their interests sustained and protect in order to boost the overall economy, as in the case of Nigeria.
Yes, I see that.
Should I take the question again, Prof?
Please go on. Please go on.
Okay, she wants to know how can the medium players tribes and their interests be sustained and protected in order to boost the overall economy, as in the case of Nigeria.
Well, I would like to thank you, Mr. Hekioya Lawrence. Now, let me just say quickly that this is a huge argument in the Nigerian context, which is you need to go and read the Petroleum Industry Act. There's an attempt to ameliorate this for the host communities, but there are 3 interventions which are safe for small players in the Petroleum Industry Act. The first is trying to pump more money into the host communities, which will allow it to be renewed. Then 2, the intervention about the marginal fields, which are supposed for smaller players. Then thirdly, the issue of local content. Local content law, if it's pushed, you push that envelope further, it will tackle the issues which you're talking about medium players, because the higher players need a lot of money. But if you will use the route of the local content law to ensure that you put a cap on a threshold of contracts and the service agreements and the interventions and work in the oil and gas sector to only a particular level, and you cannot give this high to outsiders, it will encourage the medium players to come in. So it requires, I think, a 3-point measure, trying to ensure that the low content law is enforced to the minimum, to the maximum. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, Prof, I didn't know I'd muted myself.
Yes.
Mr. Asian Prosper wants to know, has a question. He said, energy policy multi-level governance at subnational level and transnational level. Do you understand the question?
What is no question, it's a statement. Energy policy multi-level governance. What's the question? What's the question? There's no question. Well, as I explained, it's just a statement, but as I just said, he just repeated what I said. Energy policy is at first at international level, involving the international treaties. Then it comes to the national level that involves the national policies. Then it comes to the local level where there are local laws. So it's actually a level where there's transnational at international treaties, the national level at policies, and then the law. So he's correct. He just agree with what I said.
Okay. So Wale Adebi wants to know the time frame for that. What will you suggest a time frame for the commencement of the transition regime in Africa, with Nigeria as a case study? That is, what time frame would you suggest for the commencement of the transition regime in Africa, with Nigeria as a case study?
Mr. Adebi, currently over 80% of Nigerians lack energy. The statistics I'm not sure about because I've not revised them recently. But the overwhelming population of Nigeria doesn't have energy. You can't transit now when they don't have energy, because if you transit, what you are saying is that downplay the use of fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, and move to cleaner energies, hydro, solar, wind, thermal. What is the money? What is the investment? So you can't put a realistic time frame. In fact, it will be dubious and dishonest to put a time frame now. You need to say, let us go slow and steady until we attain some measure of energy sufficiency and availability. So if Nigerians have to level or half of Nigerians have access to energy, you can begin to talk of energy transition. But right now, putting a time frame is a very dubious and very fruitless exercise because we don't have energy. I don't know about you, but I talk to people, I'm talking to people who are outside, who are in Nigeria, and they tell me energy has gone bad in the past week, so bad in the towns. But the energy villages is not there. And the villages are larger than, much larger. So we can't put a time frame. There can't be a time frame in this case until we attain energy sufficiency, or at least minimally.
Okay, Ancient wants to know your advice on conducive energy policy on institutional framework for Africa.
Okay. My advice?
Yes, sir.
Let me just read for him what I'm writing. The Oxford University Press asked me to write a paper on the issue of energy transition, and I'm writing something on the abstract. I have written, I'm attempting to write an abstract. This is what I say. Crafting and developing an energy policy for Africa faces a twofold energy challenge. Meeting the needs of billions of people who still like basic modern energy services, while simultaneously participating in the global transition to clean, low carbon energy systems. So any law, any policy that Africa is going to develop must speak to these two issues in a very careful, balancing way. Meet the needs of the billions of Africans who don't have access to power, and also ensure that they have energy access while you begin to transit as they meet it. So it's a middle level now. Craft a policy that speaks to the needs of Africa and speak on the longer term level how you transit. So the short term is don't transit. Short term is meet the needs. Middle term begin to move. The long term you move. So the policy should have three phases: short term, middle level, and long term. That's what I would suggest. And I'm not prof. People are referring to prof. I'm not prof. So I'm not professor, please. Thank you. Thank you.
They are prophesizing, sir. Finally, what do you think as Africans we can do to better position our energy industry using our laws? How do you think we can use our laws to better position our energy industry?
There's a huge, again, I'm doing a paper on that. Africa is a country that has the largest concentration of renewable energy sources. The continent of Africa has the largest renewable sources in the world. We have exploited less than 1% of it. The challenge is to have a conversation with international agencies, IMF, World Bank, ADB, to have a concerted funding regime to begin to have long-term funding for renewable resources in hydro, in solar farms, in wind farms, so that in the next 5-10 years, renewable energy can be something of the past. It requires a huge sense of funding. The money is there. The money is there. The challenge is the West is telling us, we don't give you money until you start. Well, say you can't start until there's money. So let the international justice give money for these farms to begin to start. When they start doing, you can start transiting. That's my advice I'll give. People are asking for the presentation. I think the organizers, they have a copy of the presentation.
Yes, sir. I have sent a message in the box, the chat box, that all the presentations and the recordings will be sent to individual emails. And you can also get the recordings on our YouTube channel at Lawyers in Energy Network.
Thank you.
So we will do that. We have come to the end of today's session, and I would like to use this medium to say a big thank you to you, Dr. for this wonderful and brilliant presentation. We are really honored that you could take out time out of your very busy schedule to educate us on today's topic. We really appreciate it a lot, sir. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
So our great audience, we say thank you for your patience. And finally, to our partners, Centurion Law Group and Broomshy Consultancy, we are really grateful to you for your support in making this event possible and at no cost to the delegates. We really appreciate your support a lot. Thank you so much. Don't forget that you can join the network as a member by visiting our website at www.lawyersInEnergyNetwork.com and click on the subscription button at the top of the page. The training continues tomorrow at the same time by 11 a.m. Central African Time and the same venue Zoom. So you use the same link in your email to join the training every day. My name is Rakiba Oloko, and I'm the Executive Secretary of Lawyers in Energy Network, and I'm happy to have moderated this session. See you again tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.